Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me play Baldur's Gate 3. Specifically, this is my class guide series. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Ranger. I'm probably going to end up actually doing two separate videos on the Ranger. There are two different builds for the Ranger that actually get built relatively differently. So I will actually separate this into two videos, I think. But first things first, let's go over the Ranger. Rangers are unrivaled scouts and trackers, honing a deep connection with nature in order to hunt their favoured prey. We'll go over the choices in a minute. We'll go through just the class features you get off the bat, that every choice will get, which is you get proficiency in strength saving throws, as well as dexterity saving throws. You have proficiency in light armor and medium armor, shields, simple weapons, and martial weapons. So, much like the fighter, aside from heavy armor, you get pretty much everything. So you can use any martial weapons, any simple weapons, you can use shields, medium armor, light armor. Unfortunately, you don't get that heavy armor, but a lot of the time you probably don't need heavy armor. But, having said that, going into the choices you can make. Firstly, you choose a favored enemy, and you choose a natural explorer feat. For favored enemy, first one is Bounty Hunter. You gain proficiency in investigation, and creatures you restrain have a harder time escaping. It's interesting. I don't know, the second part of that is not entirely clear what that means. I think it means there's a particular spell you can get as a hunter, which will restrain a creature. I'm assuming that's what that is. But it doesn't tell you what it means actually, like, specifically. So, we'll have to... I don't know. I think someone needs to actually figure out what this is. Someone's going to have to do extensive testing. Alright, sorry about that, we're back. So you can have Keeper of the Veil. You specialize in hunting creatures from other planes of existence, you gain proficiency in Arcana, and you cast Protection from Evil and Good. Protection from Evil and Good means that you cannot be charmed by Celestials, Elementals, Fae, Fiends, and Undead. Neither can you be frightened by them, and when they attack you, they do so with disadvantage. Relatively good spell, requires concentration. You don't have a whole lot of spell slots as a Ranger, so keep that in mind. You may not want to keep this up. However, I mean, you're fighting aberrations in this because of Mind Flayers, so that's a thing. Arguable. The thing here is this could potentially be really good, this spell, when the full game releases, but as it stands in early access, there's not a whole lot of fights where this is a useful spell to have. That's the problem with it currently. You can go Mage Breaker. You have a history of battling spellcasters. Gain proficiency with Arcana and the True Strike cantrip, which gives you advantage on attack rolls against a creature. Wisdom is your spellcasting ability for this spell. True Strike indeed gives you advantage against a target. The problem with this is it costs an action. I was really hoping they would change this in Baldur's Gate 3 to be a bonus action, because that would make this a fairly good spell. As it stands, it's not a great spell. Because this lasts for, quote-unquote, 2 turns, but that means you cast it, and then it works the next turn. There are so many ways you can improve True Strike as a spell. And they just didn't. So the problem with this, by the way, is you can use your action to give yourself advantage on your next attack roll. And then your next attack roll has advantage. Great. The problem is you could have just shot it the first... Like, say you're shooting with an arrow. You shoot it the first turn, then you shoot it the second turn. That's exactly the same as having advantage. Like, your chance to hit-wise is exactly the same as having advantage. But you can do potentially double the damage. So it's like... I don't get this spell. It's just so bad. Nevertheless, we have Ranger Knight. This one's an interesting one. You have sworn service to the crown or nation and seek to bring its foes to ruin. You gain proficiency with history and heavy armor. So if you take the Ranger Knight, you get history proficiency, which is whatever. You get heavy armor proficiency. So you're effectively, if you take Ranger Knight, you're effectively a fighter who gets a couple of spells, which is interesting. Certainly interesting. And then finally we have Sanctified Stalker. You swore to hunt the enemies of a holy or druidic order. Gain proficiency with Religion and the Sacred Flame cantrip, which deals 1d8 radiant damage. Wisdom is your spellcasting ability for this spell. Choices here for the build I'm about to do don't actually matter all that much. I'm going to take Sanctified Stalker. The reason being is that the build I'm going to do in this first video is based entirely around ranged combat. What that means is that when you have a creature that is prone, you get disadvantage on your ranged attacks against it. However, if a creature is prone, Sacred Flame has a 100% chance to hit, because it is a dexterity saving throw, and you automatically fail a dexterity saving throw if you're prone on the ground. So this is purely for hitting prone creatures, otherwise we're probably not going to use it all that much. But next you have Natural Explorer choice. So, first things first, you have Beast Tamer. Beast Tamer gives you the Find Familiar spell that you can cast as a ritual, so you can have a familiar up whenever you want. Next is Urban Tracker. An expert at navigating the wilds within the city, you gain proficiency with a disguise kit and thieves' tools. Currently, I don't think a disguise kit even exists in the game, so, you know, you'll be able to pick locks easier, but currently disguise kit does nothing, so only half of this is actually working currently. And then you get the next three, which are all fantastic. You'll spend endless days in the desolate tundras, you gain resistance to cold damage, taking only half damage for it. Or you've spent your endless days surviving forbidden deserts, you gain resistance to fire. Or you've spent endless days in swamps, and you have resistance to poison. So you can just get resistance to one of these elements. My argument here would be fire tends to come up more than the other elements. Certainly true. That is certainly true. I would pick fire probably is better than the other two, just by the prevalence of fire. The only thing, but again, here is a relatively free choice for the build I'm going to show you. It is worth noting, though, that the Beast Tamer here, at least when I first went through, so in my actual playthrough, which I did a playthrough of a Ranger, you can watch it top right now, but in my playthrough of this, the Find Familiar spell does not work concurrently with the Beast Companion that you can choose if you choose the Beast Companion subclass later on. So later on, the Ranger gets the ability to get a Beast Companion if they wish. I could not have my Find Familiar up and my Beast up at the same time. I think that should be a thing that happens, and I'm not sure whether it was a bug, but just know that currently you can't do that, so maybe avoid Beast Tamer if you plan on going down that subclass route. As for me, I'm probably going to take Wasteland Wanderer Fire. Alright, as for your class your race choice, rather. Wood Elf here is a very good choice, because Wisdom is how they cast their spells for Rangers, and Dexterity, for this build particularly, is very, very good. So plus 2 into Dexterity is good. High Elf, not as optimal, you get Intelligence rather than Wisdom, so I'd say Wisdom is probably the better choice there. Tiefling, not a great choice, but an interesting choice. Specifically because they get Hellish Resistance. So, they get resistance to fire damage by their race. If you then go to class, you can choose, I don't know, cold damage, for instance. We now have resistance to 2 relatively common types of damage. That's kind of amazing. Kind of amazing. You don't really get a great choice of ability scores here. Charisma is fine, I suppose. Intelligence is fine, I suppose, but they don't really help you with your class. I mean, here, Charisma Strength, the current build I'm doing, this is even worse. But it is worth knowing, just because having resistance to 2 different elements is so good that it may be worth dumping your stats to actually get that. Drow. We get plus 2 into Dexterity, which is really nice. We get Charisma rather than Wisdom, which isn't ideal. However, 2 Dexterity is still 2 Dexterity. Human, great choice for everything. As I said before, you get plus 1 to everything. It's great. Gith Yankee gets Strength and Intelligence, neither of which we need. Probably wouldn't choose a Gith Yankee. They also get a couple of additional proficiencies, but as a Ranger you have all of these proficiencies anyway, so there's, I would say, no reason to pick a Gith Yankee for your Ranger. Dwarf. Dwarf is certainly interesting, particularly the Gold Dwarf, because you get plus 2 into Constitution, you also get Wisdom. You also get... where is it? Here. You get Resistance to Poison. So, much like with the Tiefling, the Dwarf gets Resistance to Poison, and then in your class, you can grab yourself Resistance to Fire. So again, 2 resistances right off the bat. And the Dwarf is even better, because the Dwarf actually gives you things that are useful. 2 Constitution and plus 1 into Wisdom. That's great. That's a perfectly usable Ranger class. And going forward, you get a Shield Dwarf, which is plus 2 into Strength, which, for this build, completely useless. But the Gold Dwarf, 2 into Constitution, 1 into Wisdom, quite nice. Half-Elf. I mean, I've said this with all my builds so far, but Half-Elf is just a fantastic choice for pretty much anything you want. Plus 2 into Charisma. I've said this in every video, and I'm going to say it in every video going forward. I like having some charisma on my lead characters, just because they often end up in conversations, because they're walking in front of everyone else a lot of the time. But here, I mean, it's done it for me. Dexterity and Wisdom. +1 into each is nice, and then you get 2 into Charisma. It's fine. And finally, Halfling. Halfling is pretty good choice on either of them, to be perfectly honest. I would say the Strongheart is slightly better, stat-wise, but they both get +2 into Dexterity, which is fantastic, it's what we want. And you can use a +1 into Constitution or a +1 into Charisma. For my... There we go. For my preference, I would say Wood Elf is probably, strictly speaking, the best, quote-unquote, choice you can make, because of that 2 Dexterity and 1 Wisdom. It's pretty much a perfect stat split for what you want. Speaking of the stats, if we go to... Yeah, that's fine. If we go to Abilities, Strength, you don't need it. For this build specifically, we're going to focus fully on ranged, so we can pump Dexterity all the way up to 16. It's worth noting here you could go to 17, but there actually isn't any mechanical benefit to going to 17 rather than 16, so I'd keep it at 16. Constitution, I would say at 14. Maybe. Let's go 12 for now. Intelligence, I like to have at least at 10. Wisdom, we want to get up probably to 16. And that leaves us with 5 points, which should give me to 12 Charisma and then 13 Constitution. It's worth noting here that optimally, you would get rid of some of this Charisma and put that into Constitution. This is optimally a better build for fighting. However, I think taking that 1 point off Constitution and putting it into Charisma is probably better just so you can pass some of those speech checks for Deception, Intimidation, all that kind of stuff. But that's pretty much it, so I think we can move on to the level ups. Alright, and here we are back for level 2. Through experience you gain, you acquire power and you gain the following traits. Extra hit points, as always, you get 2 level 1 spell slots, which is quite nice. You also get a choice of passive. This is the same choice as the fighter passive. You can have Archery, so you get a +2 bonus to attack rolls you make with ranged weapons. Defense, you get +1 bonus to armor class, your likelihood of being hit while wearing armor. Dueling, when you are wielding a weapon in one hand and the other hand is empty, you gain +2 bonus damage rolls with that weapon, increasing the chance to do heavy damage. And 2 weapon fighting, when you attack with 2 weapons, you can add your ability modifier to the damage of the offhand weapon. We're taking Archery. We're focusing very heavily on Archery in this build, so the +2 bonus to attack rolls is fantastic. It makes you hit very often. As far as spells, so, choices here. We have Animal Friendship, Charm a Beast and Convince it you mean no harm. It's nice. Cure Wounds, it's just a touch heal spell, it's quite nice. Ensnaring Strike. You attack summons Thorny Vines, dealing 1d6 +3 piercing damage and possibly ensnaring your target. Ensnared creatures take 1d6 piercing damage at the start of each turn. The creature or an ally can use its action to try and tear away the vines. Relatively good spell. I actually like Ensnaring Strike quite a lot. Fog Cloud, you create a dense fog. Creatures submerged in the fog are heavily obscured and blinded. Hail of Thorns. Shoot a volley of thorns. They deal 1d6 +3 piercing damage and explode, dealing an additional 1d10 piercing damage and the target and surrounded creatures. Attack save is a ranged attack. And you can see it's got a 60-foot range and 7-foot exploding radius. You notice this takes your action, your bonus action, and your spell slot, which is interesting. Ordinarily, the way that this works in D&D is you cast a spell as a bonus action, and then it takes effect on your next ranged attack. They just do it all in one here, which is probably a better way of doing it. This is relatively good for group damage, although I think Ensnaring Strike is arguably better. You don't often get enemies clustered well enough to make full use of this, whereas Ensnaring Strike is just great. Being able to control someone is pretty good. Hunter's Mark. Staple of the ranged class, and probably I would suggest always picking this up. But you mark a creature as your quarry, and you deal an additional 1d6 piercing damage whenever you hit them with a weapon. It's simple as that, you're doing more damage. If the target dies before the spell ends, you can use your bonus action to mark a new creature, and it does not take a spell slot to do so. So, as long as you don't lose concentration of the spell, so if you cast Hunter's Mark on one person, they then die, you can then recast Hunter's Mark for just a bonus action without using a spell slot. It's quite good. Jump will increase your jump distance by 3 times. Long Strider, you increase your movement speed of someone you touch by 10 feet, and then Speak with Animals allows you to speak with animals. I am going to take Hunter's Mark. As I said, I would always suggest taking Hunter's Mark, and then it's a pretty fair choice at this point. Ensnaring Strike is good. As I said, being able to ensnare is fantastic. Fog Cloud is also a really good choice. It allows you to sneak past a few encounters, because you can literally just walk through the fog and they can't see you. You sneak, you cast this from stealth, and then you just sneak through the fog to where you need to go. But I think I'm going to go Ensnaring Strike for this build. But that's pretty much it. For this build particularly, we're really focusing on Archery, so we're going to go Archer, and then we're going to grab Hunter's Mark and Ensnaring Strike. Cool, see you for level 3. Alright, and now we hit level 3. So for level 3, you get another spell slot. You can customize that here. As you can see, you just get to add from the list that you didn't do before. I guess I'll do Cure Wounds? Cure Wounds isn't a horrible one to have. So you get your subclass at level 3, so you can choose between the Hunter and the Beastmaster. We'll go for the Beastmaster first, I think. Beastmasters bind themselves to an animal companion, sharing an intelligent bond that flourishes in and out of combat. So, this gives you Summon Companion. You can gain a beast companion that accompanies you on your adventure and fights alongside you. There is a list of different beasts you can have, I'll put up right now. I'm not going to be able to remember them off by heart, but I think it's like Giant Spider, Bear, Wolf, Raven, and something else. I think there's 5 total. I think I'm missing one. Nevertheless, they're on screen right now. As I said, this doesn't actually work with Find Familiar. Annoyingly, you can't have both up at the same time. But the companion you summon here will have its own turn in combat. It'll be able to attack. They're not super bulky, unfortunately, because they fall behind. It's the same problem that the Beastmaster has in normal D&D, actually, is that the actual companion ends up being really squishy and hard to keep alive. The benefit of Baldur's Gate 3 summoning, however, is that they're actually summons. So you can resummon, like if you have a wolf and it gets hurt in battle, you can just resummon it and it'll come back in full health. So that's beneficial at least. Moving on now, we have the Hunter, which I think is arguably much better, particularly for this build. Hunters seek the most dangerous prey in Faerun, from ancient dragons to massive hordes of undead, and excel at slaying them all. So, you get to choose one of the Hunter's prey options. You have Horde Killer. Target 2 creatures standing close to each other, attacking them in quick succession. Very good. Then we have Giant Killer. If a large or bigger creature attacks you, you can use your reaction to make a melee attack. Less good in this game, at least in early access as far as I'm concerned. Definitely has its uses, however. And finally, Colossal Slayer. Once per turn, your weapon attack deals an extra 1d8 damage if your target is below its hit point maximum. So if they've been hurt before by anything, then you'll do an additional 1d8 damage. Fantastic. So really this is a choice between Colossal Slayer and Hordebreaker for me. If you plan on doing a lot of fights with a bunch of small guys, Hordebreaker is amazing. If you plan on doing boss fights, Colossal Slayer is amazing. My argument would be Colossal Slayer is generally better. But, yeah, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, honestly, because there are a few instances where Hordebreaker is fantastic. If you're taking on the Goblin Camp, for instance, there's a lot of times where you're going to be hitting 2 creatures rather than 1. And that's, like, doubling your damage output is always going to be nice. But I would say generally Colossal Slayer is better for this, because really what this build is for is doing huge amounts of damage with Hunter's Mark and Colossal Slayer with your bow. But that would be my suggestion. Alright, moving on to level 4. Alright, and for level 4 we can go on to the feat choice. My actual recommendation here is to go for the ability score improvement rather than taking another feat, if I'm being perfectly honest. Either putting 2 points into Dexterity, 2 points into Constitution, or 2 points into Wisdom. Wisdom will make your spells a bit better. Constitution will mean you're less likely to get your concentration broken when you're casting a spell. That's really quite important on this build because Hunter's Mark is amazing and you don't want to lose your concentration on Hunter's Mark. And Dexterity is just better. It can put you up to 18 Dexterity, that's fantastic. It means you're a +4 multiplier. Modifier, not multiplier. A +4 modifier rather than a +3 modifier, so you're going to be doing more damage, you're going to be hitting more often. It's fantastic. +2 into Dexterity here is an amazing choice. If, however, you want to choose a separate feat, Tough is always a good choice, +2 to your maximum hit points per level, so an additional 8 hit points at level 4. Magic Initiate Cleric isn't a horrible option. You gain a spell slot of first level, which is restored on a long rest, so you gain an additional spell slot, and you learn 2 cantrips and 1 first level spell from the Cleric spell list. Because Clerics use Wisdom, as do Rangers, getting additional spells you can cast with your Wisdom is quite good. It kind of links in very, very nicely. And finally, Martial Adept is also an amazing choice here. The battle maneuvers you get from Battle Master are absolutely amazing as a fighter subclass. Being able to pick up 2 of these maneuvers is pretty cool. Pushing attack and menacing attack are the ones that I would take, but they do an additional D8 damage, which is fantastic. You've got to love more damage, and more damage you can definitely do with these Battle Master things. You only get 1 superiority dice, so you can only do that attack once, but when you do it, it does some serious damage. But that's all for the feats. Alright everybody, and we're back for the equipment section. So the Ranger actually relies on equipment, well I wouldn't say relies on, but can make use of a lot of equipment that other classes tend not to, or at the very least, often don't. Notably poisons. I find that using poisons is really useful here. Basic poison you'll find a lot of. You can see I've got 6 here, even though I've been using some as I've been going. You coat your weapon in acid, an acrid smell poison, and you essentially just add poison damage to your weapon. Very useful. Whiff and poison, there's only a couple of these in the early access. I think these are the only 2. They can be gathered, both of which in the Druid Grove. If you explore around the Druid Grove, you may find these. But these do 7d6 poison damage, which is ludicrous. Once again, you can add these to your weapon, so your weapon does an additional 7d6 poison damage. Kinda ridiculous. Whiff and poison is pretty OP. Also notable is the arrows you can buy. Now, I only have 3 different types here. There are a bunch that you can have. As I was playing through, I ended up using quite a few. But fire arrows do an additional 1d4 fire damage, and they create a fire surface. So, very similar to... it's kind of the effect of the firebolt spell added to your arrow, which is quite nice. Acid arrows. I find these probably one of the most useful arrow, because acid in this game lowers the AC of whoever is standing in it. So, if you're at a high position, you can use this arrow to lower the target's AC and be able to hit them much easier. And then we have Arrow of Lightning, which does an additional d4 lightning damage and electrifies blood and water. So if they're wet, then this will do even more because it will electrify them, which is a detriment. It sucks being electrified. Now, as for the gear, I've only got like 5 things here that are really worth it. Maybe 6. Notably, melee weapon I tend not to use at all on this build. I have a rapier just because it's slightly better than a short sword, and it's probably the best dexterity weapon you're going to be able to find, as far as a melee weapon. So if you do have to attack in melee, you've got something. I also equip a shield, so that bumps my AC up even higher, which is nice. And here we have a longbow. If you can use martial weapons, a longbow is in every way better than a short bow. So you should get one as soon as possible. The earliest convenient place you can get one is when you first reach Sylvanas' Grove in the Druid Camp. If you come up right here, there is a tiefling that dies. He dies in the cutscene. The poor bloke doesn't have a chance. But if you go up to him, you wait for the little cutscene with his friends who are very sad that he's dead. His friends will run off to go kill a goblin. But when they do so, if you sneak and go to his body, he will have one. So you can get one for free just by taking it off his body. Yeah, this guy... to die in a cutscene. It kind of sucks. You never had a chance. But if you don't feel good about stealing off a dead corpse, then you can come down here to the blacksmith who is just here, and he'll sell you a longbow. For relatively cheaply, it doesn't actually cost that much to get yourself a longbow. Also at this merchant, we have the armor that I'm wearing. There we go. The scale mail +1. This is the same as Githyanki half-plate, so if you're not using Lizelle, you can easily just rip off the Githyanki half-plate and use that instead. I actually think this looks better on a lot of races, to be honest. This scale mail looks fantastic. The Githyanki half-plate looks pretty damn good on a lot of races too. Those really big red jewels look really cool. But I think this scale mail looks better. It is relatively expensive though, that's worth keeping in mind. For the gloves of power, these, when you do a weapon attack, you have the chance to get Bane on your target, which is fantastic. I've noted before, and I'll note again, you have to actually be marked by the Absolute, which you do at the Goblin Camp. So if you go to the Goblin Camp and you talk to Priestess Gut in here, she will give you she will brand you with the mark of the Absolute. And once you're branded, then you can use these gloves with impunity. Ignore this inventory. I may have killed too many people, including all the traitors. So, you know. Mike and Eds might buy it, I don't know, we'll find out. Yes, but These will give Bane to an enemy that you attack with a weapon attack. However, if you don't have the Mark of the Absolute, it will also put Bane on you, which is horrible. You don't want Bane on yourself every time you do an attack. Okay, as for jewelry, Crusher's Ring is fantastic here. Particularly if you choose to be a Wood Elf, because this has 10 feet speed, which is good for everybody. For a Wood Elf who already has a increased base speed, they already have a base speed of 35 rather than 30, this puts it up to 45, you can run insane distances, which is really good for covering ground to get to high ground, so that you can get your advantage on your attacks.
Hello, you! Not the best elves. Think you rule the world. Ah.
As the symbol glows, power courses through you. Authority.
Well, not us. Things are changing. We got the absolute on our side now. You better learn your plays. Go on, kiss my foot. Or I'll wipe that nasty look right off your pretty face.
Well, go on. Give me a nibble.
That's more like it.
As your lips touch filthy flesh, you catch a whiff of lavender. The pleasant scent gives way to the muddy taste of something you try not to identify. You carefully slide the ring off.
You enjoying that? Disgusting worm. Just remember, you're nothing here.
Impressive. Though I'm not sure I want to know why you're so skilled at that.
No, I want to hear every sordid detail.
And we have Amulet of Misty Step. You have to go relatively far down to do this, but you get this by offing the drow leader, Minthara, I believe her name is. So you can either do that by sneaking into the goblin camp and just killing Minthara. That is something you can do. Alternatively, you can side with her and then end up killing her, and there's a lot of ways you can get this amulet. However, killing Minthara is the way to get it. You can't pickpocket it off her, you can only get it after she dies. So you can't steal it from her, you have to actually kill her to get it. But having Misty Step is fantastic. The reason being, you can use this once per short rest, by the way. But Misty Step is a teleport, and it's really useful if you want to teleport to high ground, for instance. This is a bad place to demonstrate it. But if we come up here... Alright, this'll do. I'm sure many of you probably know what Misty Step does, but I'm gonna just highlight it here. If, for instance, you're in a fight over here, and you're like over here, and you're like, well, there's an enemy here, I'd really like to grab this high ground or whatever, then you can just Misty Step and go, whoop-ha! And then you've got the high ground. Having high ground as a ranger is fantastic, because your bows are going to be attacking with advantage, which is always amazing. These guys are very slow, because they have about 1,000,000 kilos on them right now. But yeah, getting the high ground is always amazing with this, so having Misty Step is awesome. Having been able to run to high ground, fantastic. And if all else fails, you can also teleport to high ground, even better. But that's pretty much it for the equipment, which also brings us to the close of this build for the Archer. Well, for the Ranger, which is the Archer build. The next video I'm going to do is going to be, again, on the Ranger, but it's going to be focusing on a melee Ranger. Specifically, a weapon in each hand, dual-wielding Ranger. You can pack out some pretty insane damage when you stack Hunter's Mark plus a bunch of other things on there. It's pretty amazing. But we'll get into that next episode. If you like this episode, please leave a like. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.